Boston, winter 2022. The city was draped in a giant layer of powdered sugar, snowflakes falling steadily under the dim glow of yellow streetlights. I stepped out of a grueling 12-hour shift at the geriatric hospital, my body exhausted, hands still bearing the marks of rubber gloves. Back at my one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of Beacon Hill, all I wanted was to kick off my soaked boots and collapse into bed. Instead, the first thing I saw was a neatly packed suitcase by the door, wrapped with the moss-green scarf I'd folded the night before. I was ready for Christmas. Small, glossy wrapped gift boxes sat beside the suitcase, like a promise that this year I wouldn't be late, wouldn't miss a single detail. A bottle of cinnamon essential oil for Mom, a thick wool sweater for Dad, a set of picture books for Aunt Martha, and a pair of leather gloves for Ethan. I still remember scouring the city to find the exact toffee candy Aunt Ramona loved, wrapping them myself as if packaging my fragile hope that this time I'd be enough. Ridiculous, isn't it? A 32-year-old resident doctor capable of handling life and death situations in the ward, yet still nervous like a child hoping to earn a seat at my own family's table. When my phone rang, I smiled instantly. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. My younger brother. In my memories, he was the golden-haired kid with green eyes that could melt the whole family. Now 27, Ethan was still fumbling through half-baked art projects our parents called creative potential. I answered cheerfully, "Hey, Ethan, ready for Christmas?" But his voice on the other end wasn't warm, it was cautious. "Nora, listen, you know Marina, right? Your new girlfriend? The sound healing expert?" I tried to inject some humor. "Yeah, her. The thing is, she's really sensitive, especially to energy. Me and Mom and Dad think, maybe this year you should take a break, skip the party. You get it, right? It's not personal." "It's not personal," echoed in my head like a hammer strike. I stared at the small, secondhand Christmas tree, its twinkling lights suddenly dimming. Before I could respond, another call came through. Mom. Her voice sweet as cotton candy but with a steel core cut in. "Sweetie, I know you're disappointed, but we just want peace. Marina's very sensitive. If you come, things might get tense. Honestly, if you knock, we won't open the door." I froze. No sugarcoating, no promises, just an absolute ban. "If you knock, we won't open the door." That was the moment I realized, to my family, I wasn't a daughter, a sister, or a doctor who'd sacrificed her youth. I was just an energy risk to be eliminated. I set the phone down and sat numbly in my small apartment, surrounded by neatly wrapped gifts. Those boxes became a bitter reminder that for years, I'd desperately tried to prove I deserved a seat at their table. There were no tears, just a chilling silence, more terrifying than any shouting. I didn't scream or beg. I just looked at the vibrant gift boxes and wondered, is family love, for some, just a privilege handed out on a whim? You might be reading this and thinking, there must be some misunderstanding. But no, I heard it clearly. No hesitation, no remorse. They chose Marina, a girl who'd been in their lives for mere months, over me, the daughter who'd been there for 3 decades. The irony? I'd spent years caring for them, paying their property taxes, covering insurance, bailing Ethan out of debt. Yet the moment an outsider complained, I became the energy burden. If this story ended here, it might just be another bitter memory. But this was only the beginning, a beginning of events that made me realize my true worth and the value of silence. And I want to ask you, reading these words, have you ever felt accepted by your family only when you're useful? Have you ever been turned into a shadow while others are celebrated? If so, I hope you'll stick around for what's coming. Because from that fateful Christmas call, my life changed, and you'll see why in the next chapter. If you've ever felt excluded, stay with me. We'll keep going to see what happens when a woman decides to stop being the invisible scaffolding for her family. The real story starts here. Some evenings, silence weighs heavier than shouting. That Christmas Eve, my tiny apartment became a witness to a decision I never thought I'd have the courage to make. The gifts still sat there, quiet and useless. Every piece of tape I'd carefully placed, every ribbon I'd tightly knotted, now felt like ropes tightening around my chest, suffocating me. I'd spent hours picking the perfect toffee for Aunt Ramona, the right scarf color for Dad, the exact scent of candle for Mom. Yet in one phone call, all that effort became a joke. I sank into a chair, peeling off the antiseptic-scented medical gloves, and let out a dry laugh that echoed off the walls. I laughed at my own foolishness. A doctor who could read blood test results, predict patient outcomes, yet couldn't foresee the chronic disease of my own family, their habit of using me as an ATM, an emotional babysitter. I reached for my laptop. My fingers trembled, not from cold. The screen lit up, its blue glow reflecting on my face in the small mirror on the wall. The woman staring back looked older than 32, dark circles under her eyes, hair disheveled, but her eyes burned with something unfamiliar. Resolve. The bank website loaded. I stared at the transfer-scheduled $8,000 line, the monthly payment to keep my parents' old house from foreclosure. My cursor hovered over cancel. I paused for a second. My heart pounded like war drums. Then, click. A small, clean sound, but it exploded in my mind like fireworks. Strangely, guilt didn't hit right away. Instead, there was a stillness, like shedding a heavy backpack after years of carrying it. Next, the credit card I used to pay Dad's insurance. Cancel. Another click. Then the automatic transfer to Ethan, to support his creative freedom without financial pressure. I smirked bitterly. Creative? If Picasso had lived off his sister's bank account, he'd never have found time to paint. Cancel. Each click severed an invisible tether. I imagined those ties binding my wrists, ankles, chest, and now, finally, I was breaking free. The room shifted in my eyes. It used to feel cramped, suffocating. But that night, with each decision, the space seemed to expand. The walls stopped closing in and became a shelter. The creaky wooden chair wasn't proof of my frugality anymore. It was my loyal support. I poured a cup of cinnamon tea, its gentle aroma filling the air. I remembered all the times I brought pudding to my parents' house, only to hear, "Who made this? It's so good," and their awkward laughs when I said, "Me." Even the food I poured my heart into was dismissed as if it materialized from thin air. Here's a brutal truth. I was never truly seen in that house. I was a shadow, a pillar, a money pump. But that night, in this small room, I saw myself clearer than ever. Of course, a part of me screamed, "If they need you, will you go back?" That question was like a cold draft through a cracked door, making me shiver. But then I looked at the screen, a row of red, canceled notifications like exclamation points. No turning back. I wondered if my parents would notice the change right away, or would they only panic when the first bill bounced? Maybe they'd call in a frenzy or worse, pretend I never existed. The irony crept in. Maybe those payments were my only ticket to being part of the family. Without them, I'd be pushed to the sidelines entirely, but this time it was my choice. I walked to the window. Boston was still snowing, layers blanketing the sidewalks. I touched the icy glass and suddenly felt kinship with this city. Like me, it wore a cold exterior, but hid layers of warmth for those patient enough to find it. That night, I wrote a list, not of gifts, but of every time I'd paid a price for my family, fixing the roof, covering medical bills, bailing Ethan out of credit card debt, countless acts no one ever acknowledged. I wrote until my hand ached, the words blurring, not from tears, but from relief. Relief at finally admitting to myself that I was exhausted. You might think I'm cruel, but imagine this. After years of pouring out your money and energy, only to be told, "We won't open the door for you. Would you keep going?" I didn't want to be the silent bearer anymore. I wanted to live as a person, not a scaffold. And on that cold Christmas Eve, I began to shed the role that had suffocated me for 3 decades. But little did I know, my silence wouldn't last. Because sometimes, even when you step back, the truth finds a way to surface. And in my case, it came from someone no one expected, Marina, Ethan's new girlfriend. They say childhood memories are like small mirrors scattered throughout an old house. Every corner you turn, you catch a glimpse of faded images, sharp enough to sting your heart. That night, after canceling all the family payments, I sat in my quiet apartment, pulled back to my childhood in suburban Boston. I was always the test model, Dad's favorite phrase. The first kid needs strict discipline, he'd tell the neighbors, half proud, half amused. You learn how to raise the younger ones better. And that younger one was Ethan, 5 years my junior, recipient of all the gentleness I never knew. At 10, I broke the only glass etched with Mom's initial. I remember that evening vividly, her icy stare, her voice sharp as a blade. Nora, you need to learn control. You're always so rushed, so clumsy. I stood frozen, my fingers stinging from a glass shard, but the physical pain paled next to the humiliation. A year later, 7-year-old Ethan scribbled all over the walls with crayons. I thought Mom would explode. Instead, she laughed, calling it natural creativity. Dad took photos, boasting to colleagues that his son had an artistic gift. Meanwhile, 12-year-old me sat in the kitchen corner with my A-plus math homework, hearing, "Don't be so serious, Nora. Good grades don't matter if you can't relax." The irony began there. My achievements were seen as excessive demands, while Ethan's failures were cherished as proof of his uniqueness. When I won a science medal in middle school, Dad said, "Good, but don't let it make you arrogant." When Ethan quit the basketball team mid-season because he was bored, Dad consoled him. "Son, knowing when to stop is strength." I grew up in a world where love was inversely proportional to effort. The harder I tried, the more they distrusted me, fearing my arrogance. The more Ethan stumbled, the more they shielded him, fearing his pain. In that strange cycle, I learned to stay silent, to suppress, to become the default caretaker. At 16, I got accepted into a summer program for gifted students. I rushed to show Mom, craving a compliment. She glanced at it, muttering, "Don't stress yourself out too much," then returned to chopping celery. I still hear the rhythmic thump of that knife, a soundtrack to her indifference. Meanwhile, when Ethan was 11, strumming a few clumsy guitar notes in the living room, the house erupted in cheers. Dad called it the family's musical future. Mom opened wine to celebrate his innate talent. I sat nearby, working on calculus, thinking, if I missed a note, they'd probably say I was causing noise pollution. In college, I got into medical school, one of the toughest programs. I brought the acceptance letter home like a trophy. Mom skimmed it, shrugged. "Don't lose yourself in work." But when Ethan dropped out of college in his sophomore year to pursue street art, the family threw a party. They hung his paintbrush photo, calling it a milestone for the Mitchells. See the pattern? Injustice doesn't always need violence. It creeps in through details, glances, comparisons. I wasn't a victim of beatings, I was a victim of deliberate neglect. I used to believe that if I tried hard enough, long enough, they'd see me. But memory after memory proved otherwise. The more I proved myself, the more they pulled back, fearing I'd outshine their prodigy son. Once in my senior year of high school, Ethan spray painted the garage wall with graffiti. I expected Dad to lose it. Instead, he called it modern street art and bragged to friends. 2 days later, I dropped a casserole dish in the kitchen and got a scolding for being careless, unreliable. Those cracks slowly built a wall inside me. I stopped hoping for proud looks. I just tried not to be blamed. But deep down, I still craved one moment where my parents smiled at me with pride, untainted by criticism. I think that's why I became a geriatric doctor. I chose to walk into rooms others avoided, wards of forgotten, abandoned elderly patients. I saw myself in them. I understood the feeling of being treated like furniture, used when needed, discarded when broken. That night in my Boston apartment, memories hit like a blizzard. I saw the 12-year-old girl holding her A-plus paper, ignored. The 18-year-old bringing her college acceptance letter home, met with a worried frown instead of pride, and Ethan, year after year, cushioned with hugs, parties, endless praise. I understood. I was never meant to shine in their eyes. I was meant to be the backdrop. And for years, I accepted that role until that Christmas call woke me up. You might think I'm bitter, but put yourself in my shoes. Could you keep smiling when they celebrated your brother's every failure while your successes were seen as threats? That's why I said enough. But the story doesn't end there, because sometimes truths buried too long find a way to surface. And this time, it came not from me, but from an outsider, Marina. If you find this story compelling, comment Y. If not, comment N. They say Christmas is when the world comes together. But that Christmas Eve, I felt the distance between me and my family wasn't just a few Boston streets, it was an entire frozen ocean. If you followed my previous videos, you know me, the eldest daughter, the one Dad called the test model. If you haven't, check out video number 2 on my channel, where I detail how my childhood was trained to make me the invisible pillar of the Mitchell household. But even without that context, just picture me alone on Christmas Eve, and you'll sense the ache in my chest. I lit a small cinnamon candle on the table. Its faint glow hit the gifts stacked in the corner, ones I'd hoped to place under my parents' tree. Steam rose from my tea, mingling with the cinnamon scent, making my tiny apartment oddly warm. But that warmth was for these 4 walls. Outside the window, snow fell relentlessly, each flake like a memory piling into a thick, inescapable layer. Across town, I pictured the Mitchell house glowing with lights. I knew the scene by heart. It was the same every year. Mom bustling with the turkey, Dad mixing creamy eggnog, Ethan joking with friends. Christmas music, clinking glasses, roaring laughter. A festive symphony I was absent from. This wasn't just not invited, it was erasure. A strike through my face in the family portrait. You might think I'm dramatizing, but imagine, for years I was the one slipping practical gifts under their tree. Car insurance for Dad, a few $100 for Ethan's rent, physical therapy for Mom's back pain. I was the invisible Santa. And tonight Santa was locked out in the cold. I held my tea, watching the steam dissolve. 2 emotions clashed inside me, the searing pain of rejection and a strange relief that I didn't have to pretend anymore. No more sitting at their table, forcing smiles through praise for Ethan while I got cold nods. The silence in this room, what most would find empty, felt like liberation to me. No more guessing who'd notice my efforts, who'd dismiss them. Silence was honest. I remembered last Christmas when Ethan brought a messy, abstract painting to the party. The family applauded like he'd cured cancer. Meanwhile, I slipped away to take an emergency call from the hospital, a patient in cardiac arrest. I got there in time, saved him. When I returned, all I heard was Mom. Nora, you always turn holidays into work shifts. This year, they saved themselves the trouble of complaining. I was cut from the picture before it even started. I sipped my tea. The warmth slid down my throat, into my stomach, but couldn't melt the ice around my heart. I looked at the gifts in the corner, clumsy proof of my naive hope that one more year of effort would change things. That night, I didn't cry. I had no tears left for repeated unfairness. I just gave a wry smile to myself. Merry Christmas, Nora, you finally get to rest. You might think the quiet lasted all night, but no. My life never stays still when I want it to. And just when you think you've vanished from the family map, an old puzzle piece, a photo from the past, rises to remind everyone you're still here. Some truths don't need my voice. They find their own path, slowly, unexpectedly, and when they surface, they're sharper than any argument. That Christmas Eve, while I sat in my apartment sipping cinnamon tea, a long-hidden truth slipped out at the Mitchell house. And ironically, it was sparked by Marina, the girlfriend they used as an excuse to exclude me. I wasn't there, but I pieced it together later through Aunt Martha and scattered texts from relatives. To fill in the gaps, I only needed imagination, well-versed in the vibe of those family gatherings. The Mitchell house must have been ablaze with light, as always, the smell of roasted turkey mingling with cinnamon and nutmeg. Bing Crosby's voice filled the living room. Ethan was surely laughing loudly, bragging to Marina about his upcoming documentary he hadn't even started. Dad would nod, pat his shoulder as if Ethan had just signed with Netflix. Then, like any new guest, Marina wandered the living room, eyeing the photos on the fireplace mantel. Those frames were a curated story. Ethan in his high school graduation gown, college dropout status ignored. Dad with a golf club award, mom at a charity gala. If you want more on their bias in photo selection, check video number 3 on my channel, where I talk about how Ethan's scribbled drawing was framed proudly, while my sketchbook got tossed in the trash. Back to Marina. She paused at an old photo, likely overlooked in their recent family image edit. In it, I was about 12, wearing an oversized burgundy sweater, smiling brightly at a simple birthday party. The frame was slightly crooked, its edge chipped, as if it was only there because someone forgot to throw it out. Marina tilted her head, eyes narrowing, then she blurted, "Isn't this Dr. Morgan?" The room went dead silent. Forks froze midair, wine glasses stopped clinking. Mom, probably holding a stiff smile, while Ethan blinked in confusion. "Doctor who?" Dad asked, trying to sound casual. "Lena Morgan," Marina said clearly. "The doctor who cared for my grandma at Beth Israel. I remember her. She sat with Grandma all night singing softly to calm her. She saved her." If you've seen some of my channel's videos, you'll recall the winter shift I mentioned, staying up all night with an elderly patient who had no family left. That patient was Marina's grandmother. It was one of the rare nights I felt my work was seen, not by medals, but by the grateful eyes of a frail woman clutching my hand. And now that memory crashed into my family's Christmas party like an uninvited guest. The air tightened like a taut string. Marina, perhaps not fully aware, pressed on. "It's so surprising to know she's Ethan's sister. Why has no one mentioned her?" That was the moment they had no escape, because silence, when held too long, rings louder than church bells. I don't know how Mom deflected. Maybe she changed the subject, maybe she laughed it off. But Marina was sharp enough to sense the unease, and she wasn't the type to let it go. That night, after leaving the party, Marina posted on social media. Not long, not directly attacking, but enough to shake things up. It's strange to see some families erase someone just to keep a perfect image, but silence is a form of abuse too. I'm lucky my grandma was cared for by someone like Dr. Nora. It's heartbreaking to see her erased from her own family's picture. The post spread quickly. Marina's artist friends shared and commented. New York's art scene, where image and connections are everything, started buzzing. The Mitchell house, always polished on the outside, began to crack from within. They were used to controlling the narrative, but now faced a truth exposed by the very girlfriend of their golden son. I didn't hear this from them, of course. They'd never call to admit fault. I heard from Aunt Martha. "Nora, you should know. People are talking. Marina's on your side." I read her message repeatedly, then opened the post. My face wasn't in it, but those words were like a spotlight on the truth they'd buried for decades. I sat still. Part of me wanted to cry, for the first time feeling seen by an outsider. Another part laughed. The irony, they excluded me to keep positive energy, but the girl they protected brought more negativity to their house than I ever could. See, sometimes justice doesn't need my fight. It comes from an offhand remark, an old, misplaced photo, a memory no one expected to resurface. But I knew the Mitchells wouldn't give up easily. They'd try to spin the story, pin the blame on me, even though I hadn't set foot in their house that night. And as I predicted, that was just the start of their new schemes. There's a lesson I've learned from years in the hospital. People fear the truth not because it's painful, but because it's too clear. And when it's exposed, they'll do anything to throw up a flimsy curtain, no matter how tattered or absurd. My family, the Mitchells, was no exception. After Marina's post, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages from distant relatives who normally didn't bother with birthday wishes suddenly cared. Not, "Are you okay?" but, "What did you say to Marina?" Funny, right? They were so used to assuming I'd done something wrong. Then one morning, I opened an email, a long one, sent jointly from Mom, Dad, and Ethan. It started with cliches. "Dear Nora, we know there's been a lot of misunderstanding. The holiday season makes people sensitive." I laughed out loud. This wasn't a family letter. It was a corporate press release for a faulty product. The core came midway. "You could help the family by talking to Marina, asking her to take down the post. It's causing unnecessary misunderstandings. You know how important our family's image is in the community." Image, always image, never feelings, never me. If you've seen video number 4 on my channel, where I talk about my absent Christmas, You'll get why this email made me laugh bitterly. I was cut from their table, but now they dragged me back, not to sit with them, but to clean up their public relations mess. I stared at the screen, remembering years past. When Ethan couldn't pay rent, they called me. When the roof leaked, they called me. When Mom needed surgery, they called me. Now, with their reputation wobbling, they called again. Not with apologies, but with orders disguised as, "We're family." But that wasn't the worst. The worst was their covert campaign. Aunt Ramona, the only one who still sent me handwritten birthday cards, texted, "Nora, they're saying you're too stressed. They say your job's affecting your mental state. Is that true?" I froze. So they didn't just ask me to clean up. They painted me as unstable to shield their image. Once again, I was their scapegoat. I could picture Dad, calm as ever, saying at a family dinner, "Poor Nora, her doctor job's too much. Sometimes she overthinks, acts extreme. We need to be understanding." Oh, how compassionate. But really, it was their cruelest blow. When people believe you're unhinged, your words lose all weight. Their use of pity to dismiss the truth choked me. Pity is neglect wrapped in cellophane, sweet but toxic. I thought back to Marina's grandmother, the night I sat by her bed for hours, singing softly. I knew then that sometimes silent presence is stronger than medicine. Now labeled unstable, I saw how easily silence could be twisted. See? My family didn't need to shout that I was surplus. They just told a different story, over and over, until others believed I was the problem. That's the art of denial, one the Mitchells had mastered for years. But what they didn't expect was that I was done sitting quietly. I didn't fight back loudly or post my side. I stayed silent, deliberately, because the fewer words I said, the louder the truth rang. Marina was still there, her post still up, and the community was asking questions. Honestly, in that moment, I was both angry and amused. My whole life I fought for recognition, and they denied it. But when an outsider recognized me, they had to spin another denial to save face, like locking themselves in a room they'd set on fire. That evening, I sat in my apartment, watching snow fall outside. The cinnamon tea steamed, reminding me that true peace doesn't come from family praise, but from stopping the wait for it. I knew I no longer owed them explanations. You might ask, "Nora, why didn't you speak up, fight back?" Simple. I learned that when someone scrambles to build a false wall, your silence exposes their weakness. And sure enough, their cover-up only made the cracks clearer. Then something unexpected happened. Not from me, not from Marina, but from Ethan, the over-pampered brother. Ironically, it became the one moment that forced the family to face the truth about me. Sometimes, life is a play built on paradoxes. They exclude you, smear you, then come running back to beg for help. And often, that moment doesn't come in peace. It arrives in chaos, with ambulance sirens, sweat, and panic. That's what happened with Ethan, just one day after Christmas. December 26th, Boston still blanketed in snow. I was at my window, sipping bitter coffee, thinking about the family's press release email. I'd almost accepted they'd keep spinning stories to push me out, and I'd keep silent. But then my phone rang, and with it, fate's door swung open. It was Aunt Martha, her voice trembling. "Nora, you need to come to St. Luke's Hospital now. Ethan, he's been in an accident." I paused for a few seconds. Part of me wanted to snap. What's that got to do with me? But the raw fear in her voice felt different. Not Mom's exaggerated worry, but real panic. That morning, Ethan had driven in a stressed state. Maybe it was Marina's post, the gossip, or leftover wine from the Christmas party. His car skidded on icy roads, hitting a lamppost. Not physically severe, minor cuts, head bleeding, but the emotional shock was massive. In the ER, Ethan was frantic. He pushed nurses away, yelling at the attending doctor, "Don't touch me, I don't trust you!" The spoiled brother, who thought the world revolved around him, was now cowering like a lost child. And ironically, in that moment, he called only one name, mine. My parents were there, of course. I could imagine their pale, panicked, confused faces. They were used to me handling every crisis, and now, without me, their helplessness was glaring. Aunt Martha said. Mom whispered, "Call Nora, she'll know what to do." I almost laughed hearing that. She'll know what to do. Suddenly, I wasn't negative energy or upsetting Marina. In a crisis, they remembered I was a doctor, the one who stays calm, who'd been there for hundreds of terrified patients. When I walked into St. Luke's, the antiseptic smell was familiar. I saw my parents in the hallway. Their eyes met mine, part awkward, part pleading. No sorry, just a slight nod, silently admitting I was their only hope. In the room, Ethan lay on the bed, sweating, pale. His panicked eyes softened when he saw me. Nora, his voice broke like a child's. I stepped forward, took his hand. Strangely, despite being excluded, I felt no hatred in that moment. Instead, my professional and sisterly instincts surged. I took a deep breath, speaking softly. "You're okay, Ethan, I'm here." The nurses stepped back, letting me sit by the bed. I checked his pulse, his wounds. Not critical, as reported, but psychological panic could leave lasting scars. I guided him through breathing, counting with him, as I'd done for countless anxious or dying patients. Slowly, Ethan's breathing steadied. Tears spilled out. Then suddenly, he sobbed like never before. "I'm sorry, Nora, all these years, I was wrong." I froze. It was the first time Ethan had apologized. The brother always shielded, always right, was now breaking in my arms. My parents stood outside, watching silently. I felt their eyes through the glass, shocked and ashamed. But I didn't turn. That moment wasn't theirs, it was mine and Ethan's. I held his hand tighter, saying softly, "We'll talk later, rest now." A storm of emotions churned inside me. Part relief. Ethan finally saw me, not as invisible scaffolding, but as a person. Part bitterness. It took a hospital bed, life hanging in the balance, for him to value me. "See, that's the Mitchell family. They only acknowledge you when they're out of options. They only call my name when crisis corners them." And that was both my pain and proof of the truth they'd denied. I was the one keeping this family from falling apart. That night, after Ethan stabilized, I stepped into the hallway. Mom approached, lips trembling like she wanted to speak, but stayed silent. Dad just said, "Dad, thank you." Short, cold, like I'd fixed a flickering light bulb. No remorse, just pragmatic acknowledgement. I did what they couldn't. I left the hospital as snow fell thickly. Two words echoed in me: bitter irony. They locked me out of Christmas, but needed me the next day. And the worst part? I still came, still helped, still extended my hand, knowing they'd forget once the danger passed. But this time was different. I wasn't the girl waiting for praise anymore. I came, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be true to myself. I'm a doctor. I'm a sister. And I'll do what's right, even if no one acknowledges it. They say you only realize who's truly there for you when death looms close. For me, that moment came in St. Luke's ER, with Ethan, the pampered gem of the family, shivering, while the rest stood helplessly outside the glass. I remember walking into that room vividly. The air was thick with antiseptic, fluorescent lights glaring down on Ethan's pale face. Sweat beaded his forehead, eyes darting like a trapped animal. He flinched at every white coat, shoving nurses, knocking over a tray of tools. Then I walked in and everything changed. "Nora." He called my name, voice cracking like a child's. I stepped to the bed. A flicker of irony in me. Just yesterday, I was negative energy banned from Christmas. Now, I was the only one Ethan let touch him. Life has a cruel sense of humor. I didn't speak right away. I took his cold hand, placed it on my chest, and said softly, "Listen to me, Ethan, breathe with me." I inhaled slowly, letting my chest rise visibly. 1, 2, 3, exhale. 1, 2, 3. At first he choked, unable to follow. I squeezed his hand, locking eyes. "You're not alone here, I'm here, trust me." Maybe it was the strange mix of my doctor's authority and sisterly familiarity, but Ethan began to calm. His chaotic breaths steadied. I checked his pulse, 120, 130, dropping to 90, then stable at 80. The nurse sighed in relief, but I didn't look away. This wasn't just calming a panic attack. It was Ethan facing the truth. The sister he'd dismissed was the one pulling him from the edge. "I'm sorry." His words came between heavy breaths. You're always here. And I..." His voice broke. I felt his shoulders shake. Ethan, the family star, celebrated at every gathering, crumbled like a child learning to admit fault for the first time. I nodded, not rushing to comfort. Some apologies need to sink in, not be soothed instantly. I only said, "Rest, we'll talk when you're stronger." In that moment, I wasn't just a doctor on duty, but a sister reclaiming a place long stolen. That cramped, cold-lit room became the only place in 30 years where I felt I mattered to my brother. Through the glass, I saw my parents. Mom's hand covered her mouth, eyes red. Dad stood rigid, his tense shoulders betraying unease. They saw it all, but I knew this wasn't their awakening, just a crisis I happened to fix. They weren't ready to admit that without me, things would have collapsed long ago. I stayed with Ethan another half hour, checking blood pressure, calming him through tremors. I used skills honed over years: steady voice, firm gaze, sure hands. But above all, I used what my family never valued: genuine care. At one point, Ethan looked at me, tears spilling, whispering, "Why do you still help me? After everything I've done?" I gave a bitter smile. "Because I'm your sister. Because I know how. And because if I don't, no one else will." He gripped my hand tighter, as if realizing for the first time that true connection isn't loud parties or empty praise, but steady presence in the darkest moments. I heard Dad's faint cough in the hallway, Mom's stifled sob. They said nothing to me. But their silence was worth more than any excuse. For 30 years, they'd never bowed to me, and now, even if just through averted eyes, I knew they saw me differently. I didn't expect everything to change after that night. Deep-rooted habits don't vanish quickly. But this cracked open a gap in the Mitchell family's thick wall, and it started with Ethan's tears. As the nurse checked Ethan's vitals, I stood. He grabbed my hand again, whispering, "Don't leave me, Nora." I looked at him, saying gently, "You need rest, but this time, you need to learn to stand on your own. I can't always be your scaffold." His eyes blurred, but I saw a spark of understanding. Small, but a start. I left the room with lighter steps. The wounds were still there, but the burden was gone. I knew I'd done the right thing, not for thanks, but to free myself. They say apologies come in grand settings: a romantic dinner, a conference room, or at least a handwritten letter. But for me, Ethan's first apology came amid the steady beeps of a heart monitor, the cold sting of antiseptic, and the hospital's harsh lights that left no room for illusions. Ethan woke after a few fitful hours. I was still there, on a hard plastic chair, cold coffee in hand. I'd seen hundreds of patients wake post-surgery, thousands open their eyes after shock, but my heart never raced like it did watching my brother's bleary eyes find me. "Nora," his voice was hoarse, each word heavier than his bandaged body. You're still here?" I nodded. For a moment I wanted to snap. "Yeah, I didn't magically vanish like you hoped." But I held back. Sometimes, bitterness needs to yield to something bigger. Then Ethan cried. Not the fake tears I'd seen when he wanted forgiveness for debts or failed projects. This was a sob from deep in his chest, shaking his shoulders. He reached out, hugged me, clinging like a lifeline in a flood. "I'm sorry, Nora. All these years, I never thanked you. I took everything you did for granted. I thought you were just the background. But if you weren't here today, I don't know." His voice broke, mixed with tears. I stiffened in his arms. Part of me wanted to push away, to remind him that just yesterday, I was banned from Christmas like a stranger. But another part melted quietly. I didn't forgive instantly, but I knew. This moment was real. Ethan finally saw. Outside the glass, my parents stood. Mom cried silently, for once not shouting to defend some excuse. Dad bowed his head. Not to me, but to the truth he couldn't deny. The daughter they saw as invisible scaffolding was the one holding the house up. The room felt heavy, yet oddly warm. I felt my long-held anger, like thick ice, begin to crack. I didn't know if it would fully melt, but for the first time, light broke through. Ethan gripped my hand, voice trembling. "I don't deserve it, but you're still here. Why?" I took a deep breath, answering honestly, "Because I'm your sister, and if I'm not here, who will be?" He laughed through tears, a crooked, real smile. Maybe for the first time, he saw me not as the fixer, but as a person there out of untraded love. I heard Dad's soft cough in the hall, Mom's choked sob. They said nothing to me, but their silence was worth more than any defense. For 30 years, they'd never bowed to me, and now, even if just through averted eyes, I knew they saw differently. I didn't expect a full change after that night. Old habits die hard, but this cracked a gap in the Mitchell family's wall, and it began with Ethan's tears. As the nurse checked Ethan's vitals, I stood. He grabbed my hand again, whispering, "Don't leave me, Nora." I looked at him, saying softly, "You need rest, but this time you need to learn to stand on your own. I can't always be your scaffold." His eyes blurred, but I saw a spark of understanding. Small, but a start. I left the room with lighter steps. The wounds remained, but the burden was gone. I'd done the right thing, not for thanks, but to free myself. People say after a storm, everything stills. But I learned that stillness isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's the pause after thunder, brief, uncertain, before people slip back to old rhythms. I knew that would happen with the Mitchells. To avoid being pulled back into their cycle, I decided to write a letter. I'd never written to my family. We were used to short, snappy, or hollow words, never honest. Maybe that's why I chose writing now. A letter can't be interrupted or twisted instantly. It forces the reader to face, even briefly, what they avoid. I opened my laptop, sitting by the window as Boston lay snow-covered post-Christmas. My fingers hit the keys, each word like a hammer striking the invisible wall I'd built around myself. I began, "Dear Mom, Dad, and Ethan, I'm not writing to blame, I'm writing to set boundaries, something I should have done long ago." Typing that first line, my heart eased. For years, I'd spoken too much to be seen, met only with silence. Now, I wrote to give silence shape and weight, and I wrote that I was done being the invisible scaffolding. I once thought love meant carrying their burdens, paying debts, fixing roofs, buying plane tickets, believing one day they'd see me. But they only saw convenience, not the person. From now on, I won't carry unconditionally. I won't be the one you automatically turn to. If Ethan needs a plane ticket, let him buy it. If the roof leaks, call insurance. If taxes are due, take responsibility. I've done enough. I don't owe more. I won't lie. Typing those words stung. Part of me feared they'd read it and rage, or worse, ignore me like I didn't exist. But another part felt free, like breathing real air for the first time. I wrote about Ethan. I said the ER moment showed me that beneath the family's star mask, he was still a vulnerable boy. I didn't blame him. I just wanted him to learn to live as an adult, not waiting for someone to pave his way. "Ethan, I was there when you needed me most, but I can't live your life for you. If you truly value me, show it by changing." To my parents, I wrote, "Mom, Dad, I know you think everything you do is for the family, but family isn't just the image at the dinner table or in the neighbor's eyes. It's how you value each member, even when they don't meet your expectations. If you want to keep this family, I hope you learn to value me while there's time, because one day, when I'm not here, regret won't fix anything." I paused, looking out the window. Snow fell, white flakes covering empty streets. I realized I'd been like that snow, beautifying their picture, a backdrop for their joy, then melting silently. I didn't want that anymore. I ended the letter firmly but not cruelly. "I don't hate you, I'm not cutting ties. But from today, I'll live as an independent person, not a shadow or a tool. I hope you understand. If you don't, I'll still move forward, with peace." Printing the letter felt like signing a new contract with my life. One where I no longer promised unlimited payments to my family. I only promised to live true to myself. The next day, I put the letter in an envelope and brought it to the hospital. Ethan was still in recovery. My parents were there, worried but no longer frantic. I placed the envelope on the table, saying simply, "This is what I need to say. Read it." No one responded. Dad frowned, Mom's eyes welled up, Ethan looked away. But I didn't need an immediate reaction. I just needed them to have the letter. Like a stone dropped in a lake, it might not make a loud splash, but the ripples would spread. Leaving the room, I didn't feel heavy as usual. For the first time, I walked away from them without carrying a burden. I left a piece of myself on that hospital table, not to be used, but to force them to face the truth. That evening, back in my apartment, I brewed cinnamon tea as usual. But this time, the cinnamon wasn't bitter. It was sweeter, like I finally deserved to taste freedom. Some endings don't come with applause or dramatic flair. Sometimes they're just a quiet afternoon, snow falling outside, a warm teacup in hand, and a heart breathing freely for the first time in years. For me, that was my ending. The letter on the wall. On the small wall of my Boston apartment, where I used to hang quick sketches from night shifts, there's now a simple wooden frame. Inside is a handwritten letter from Marina, the girlfriend my family used to justify excluding me from Christmas. She wrote about her grandmother, about those final, seemingly meaningless days in the hospital, where I sat by her bedside, holding her frail hand, listening, comforting, treating with all the patience a doctor could muster. Marina called me the one who reminded Grandma she was still living, not just existing. I framed the letter not to boast, but to remind myself I was never invisible. Even if my family tried to erase me from their story, out there people saw and appreciated me. Each time the afternoon sun filters through the window, illuminating those words, I feel a quiet comfort. My worth never depended on my family's acknowledgement. Snow and tea. Boston winters are cold, but the coldest is the silence after the holidays. People leave, streets empty, shops close early. In my tiny one-bedroom apartment, warmth doesn't come from the old heater, but from the peace within. I sit by the window, cinnamon tea warm in my hands. Watching snow fall silently, I realize it's like my life. Each flake distinct, falling unnoticed, but together forming a blanket that transforms the city. Once I envied Ethan, his spotlight, his praise. Now I'm proud to be like snow, quiet but enduring, unseen yet shaping the scene. An unexpected message. My phone buzzed. I braced for another hollow email from my parents asking me to help cover their gossip fallout. But this was different. Ethan's name lit the screen. I hesitated before opening it, just one line. "You're the hero of this family. Thank you for saving me, not just in the hospital, but all the years I didn't see." I set the phone down, silent for a long time. You might think one short message means nothing against 30 years of dismissal. But to me, it was a small crack in a thick wall, not to tear it down, but to let light in. I don't expect Ethan's fully changed, but he's started. And sometimes, a small start is enough to believe things aren't entirely hopeless. Parents in silence. My parents? Still no messages, no calls. But Aunt Martha said they read my letter and sat in silence for a long time. For them, silence is progress. For years, they always had reasons, excuses. Now, they're quiet, meaning doubt has taken root. I don't expect them to change from one letter. I just hope one day, when they see an empty seat at their table, they'll remember me, not as the test model or caretaker shadow, but as a person who loved them steadfastly despite rejection. Peace and choice. I've learned peace doesn't come from apologies or change. It comes from setting boundaries and sticking to them. I've done my part for years, now it's their turn. I sip my tea, breathe deeply, feeling a freedom I've never tasted. No more midnight calls, no more invisible transfers, no more obsession with proving my worth. Just me, alone, but not lonely. Seeds of healing. Ethan texted more later, checking on me saying he's considering therapy. I smiled. Not empty promises, but signs he wants real change. I'm not rushing to embrace hope. The road to healing is long, winding, but a seed's been planted. For me, that's enough. Final light. That afternoon, with snow falling outside, I looked at Marina's letter on the wall, Ethan's message glowing on my screen, the steaming tea in my hand. They formed a simple picture, not dazzling, not showy, but enough to know I made it here, and I'm okay. My family may not fully change, the wounds may never fully fade, but I'm no longer erased. I've claimed my worth, not by begging, but by living true to myself. And for the first time, I don't need to knock on any door to find a seat. This small apartment, with sunlight through the window, warm cinnamon tea, and a letter on the wall, it's my true home. When I sat down to share this story, I didn't just want to spark curiosity about family drama. I wanted to offer something deeper, the truth that we all deserve to be seen, valued, not for our sacrifices or what we provide, but simply for being ourselves. I spent years as the invisible scaffolding, propping up, carrying, waiting for a nod of recognition. Then I realized that waiting only deepened the wounds. The truth is, love and respect don't come from giving your whole self away. They come when you say, enough, set boundaries, and live for yourself. This story, though bitter, has glimmers of light. Ethan's regretful tears, my parents' first silent bow, Marina's letter reminding me I was never invisible. They all proved that even in the most unfair families, there's a chance for change, for healing, as long as you don't lose yourself in the process. The human value I want to share isn't a fairy tale where everyone becomes perfect and loves unconditionally. Reality isn't that. Wounds may linger, bias may persist, but you can still choose peace. You can find recognition in yourself and plant seeds of healing with well-timed compassion. That's the real strength. Not changing others, but changing how you see and live your life. If you've listened this far and see yourself in this story, someone overlooked, overburdened, or waiting for recognition, I hope you know, you're not alone. You have the right to speak, to set limits, and most importantly, to build a life that doesn't need anyone's permission. Thank you for joining me to the end of this journey. If this story touched you, leave a comment below, share your experience, or simply write, I see myself in this story. I'll read them all, and don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about family, bonds, and finding yourself. Because who knows, in the next episode you might find a piece of the answer to your own life.